Good evening, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks for joining us. A police officer shot while on duty will apparently recover successfully. Less promising, though, is the condition of the criminal justice system that allowed the suspect on the streets despite previous arrests on charges that included narcotics and murder. We'll examine the machinery of justice tonight, as well as a critical report on the method of reporting crimes. We'll also be discussing who's to manage Jefferson Parish's public hospitals, Obamacare in Louisiana, new industry up the river, Edwin Edwards, reality TV star, and who's got the check at Brennans. At the table for us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4, Kathy Finn, freelance journalist, and Stephanie Grace, columnist, The New Orleans Advocate. Well, Mike, we're going to go first to you. Earlier this week, there was a police officer shooting. Fortunately, it looks like he is going to recover, but a big part of that story is the suspect who is now in custody. He has had run-ins with the law before.
Yeah, quite a few run-ins, a lengthy rap sheet, in some ways very troubling in that, and I will start by saying this is a rare case, and I have chronicled myself many cases of criminal defendants, who have slipped through the cracks. There were missed warning signs. Usually it's as somebody rises up the criminal ladder to more and more serious offenses, to the point where they, will just indiscriminately use violence. This guy was unusual in that he was sort of a veteran criminal. He was not a young hothead. He's 35 years old, which usually, and he did 2 stretches in state prison. So usually they enter what criminologists like to call sort of a criminal menopause around that age. Well, not the case with this guy. And as a matter of fact, the back end of his rap sheet seems as bad or even worse than the front end. So back when he was younger, he did catch an armed robbery conviction. That was back in 1996. He did 2 years in prison, and that's a 0 to 99 penalty on armed robbery as either a first offender or someone with a light rap sheet. He would have gotten on the low end. Mm-hmm. But very quickly thereafter, the following year, 1999, he's arrested for possession with intent to distribute heroin. And for that, he got 5 years, and he got double billed. So, meaning he's starting to, get labeled as a career criminal. Did the 5 years until 2004. Usually, once you are, tagged with 2 felonies, the next step is almost a 3 strikes you're out or a triple bill, something that would get you very serious time upon conviction. That didn't happen. He did have a pause from 2004 until 2010 when he got arrested for a simple battery, and there was another element to that is a lesser charge, but a serious red flag for police, which is resisting arrest. Mm-hmm. So here's someone who's willing to take on the police. For that, he got a 6-month sentence. So rather than continuing to, recognize that the corrections, are not working for this guy, they were, scaling back length of sentence. So shortly after that, he just in 2011. He got an aggravated battery. This is the most curious of all. I haven't pulled the file, so I don't know the circumstances, but an aggravated battery is a battery using a weapon, and it can be a gun, knife, blunt object, but nevertheless, very serious. For that, he got 2.5 years, and he got parole. And usually parole means tight supervision, or at least in theory. But the supervision was not tight enough to have him get arrested, twice in 2 months, right before this police shooting incident. A month earlier, he was arrested for a simple battery, and that was the most curious of all. On that, being on parole, he nevertheless got released on a $30,000 bail, made a commercial surety bond. And within a month, he's allegedly bailing out of a car in a shootout with police, hits an officer in the leg, and that's just a bad aim away from being the murder of a police officer.
So anybody who's heard of this story, of this incident, and listened to just what you said, is going to be asking, what's going on here? We've heard of the revolving door over at criminal court. Why has this happened with this individual?
Like I said, this is unusual, and in the case that this is somebody who's a clear recidivist and someone that, once you're in the hands of a parole officer, that means you've been to state prison. But it very much looks like, the way that the, convict community refers to these guys is they're institutionalized. They're more used to prison than the free world, and they actually know how to maneuver there. They don't know how to maneuver in the free world. And that's why you catch charges so quickly. I mean, clearly he'd armed himself, or at least allegedly, if the guy they picked up on the street minutes after the shooting or hours after the shooting is true. But, you might have to look at, in this case, state parole, whether the supervision was adequate, and then look at the circumstances of a $30,000 bond. It seems high, but in the case of somebody with this kind of rap sheet, it's actually rather low.
For this alleged offense involving the police officer shot, what kind of sentence could he possibly be facing if convicted for this?
Okay, if given a multiple bill, he could face life in prison. And let me tell you that when any kind of crime against a police officer, usually there are no breaks from prosecutors. So I would look for this guy to be doing a very long stretch.
All right, Mike, thanks. Stephanie, there is one thing that's happening in Jefferson Parish regarding the hospitals, and that's agreement to disagree on how they should be run. So background us on this.
Okay, so in Jefferson Parish, the parish itself owns 2 hospitals, one I think most people know this, one on the East Bank, one on the West Bank. They have for years. They're real kind of beloved community institutions. And there's actually been some talk of, for really as long as I've been reporting this market, which is almost 20 years, of some sort of merger alliance. That's kind of the way the healthcare field has gone, certainly over the years. And they've never been able to do it. There have been these kind of political forces pulling them apart and keeping them independent. This time it felt like it was going to be different. This time, with all the changes in healthcare and, what's happening at the big LSU hospital, there's a lot of, there was a really strong push to say, okay, we need to be part of a larger system. We're going to be going up against, Ochsner has a big system. Children's, which used to be independent, ended up over the years taking over Arturo and now is going to run the big LSU Medical Center. There's a company called HCA, which is a for-profit hospital company that's at Tulane Hospital. And, the little independent hospitals, they need, there are efficiencies. There's the idea that you have, community hospitals being feeder hospitals for larger hospitals. There's, again, a lot of uncertainty with all the changes in healthcare. And I think the sign to me that this was, I thought they were really ready to do this, was that parish officials basically went to the legislature and asked them to rescind a law that would have required a public vote on something like this. That's really hard for politicians to do. And then they rescinded a parish ordinance that would have required the same thing.
And this is to run the hospital, not to buy the hospital.
Yes, to lease them out for 30 years. And they basically put the 2 hospitals out to bid together, and those are the 3 parties I mentioned, or the 3 bidders, HCA, Children's, and Ochsner. And the idea was that the 2 boards would get together and kind of behind closed doors hash it all out. These are the politically appointed hospital boards, not the parish council. State law gives these boards in healthcare enormous kind of right to privacy, I guess. The public was supposed to know very little about it, and they were supposed to go behind closed doors and make their decision, and that was going to be that. Of course, that was not that, because East Jeff went one way, West Jeff went the other way.
There were consultants involved.
There were consultants. There's a company called Kaufman Hall. They paid $1.3 million. One of the many things they're fighting over is, was this consultant supposed to make a recommendation, and in what form?
Not only that, but they're doing television commercials too. HCA is doing
Right.
commercials, the Children's Hospital Group. So it's just as though
Right.
the public had a vote because
Exactly. I mean,
because-
they said
because they're
specifically
going
they
after
didn't want it to take on the trappings of a political campaign, and now we're
and
to
now
the
the trappings are there.
now we're to the point where the West Jeff board is saying, you know what, maybe the public should vote, because East Jeff at this point wants to go with HCA, and they're willing to break up the two hospitals in order to do it. The West Jeff forces, the board and most of the politicians want Children's, but they want the two hospitals to go together. And one of the interesting things is Parish Council Chairman Chris Roberts said he has the majority votes on the council, so he would like to call a vote. He says he doesn't want the thing spiraling out of control on his watch, and
Hasn't
because
that already happened now?
exactly. He's like,
They're
what would
waiting-
that look like?
So they're waiting for the vote for what, an Inspector General report? is
Well, again, there's the East Jeff forces are kind of pushing back on that, and in the meantime, the brand new Jefferson Parish Inspector General, this is the very first thing he's taken on, is working on a report. So right now, we're probably waiting for that, although it looks like Chris Roberts could call a vote, and he says he has the majority. I mean, I called it the nuclear option, but I mean, it could happen. And then you might have a hospital that's in a system that it doesn't want to be part of.
And then we see the coroner, Dr. Jerry Vitanovich of Jefferson Parish, do an op-ed this week saying, let's just scrap the whole thing and start all over to make sure we get it right.
Is Oxner still in the running?
You know, maybe if it's a compromise and nobody gets their first choice, but
Probably
it
not.
doesn't seem to be, no.
It was interesting, though, that you know, they do what politicians standardly do is try to take the heat off themselves and put it on a study and an
Yes.
outside consultant. So they hire the outside consultants,
Right.
and what happens? They get no recommendation, and they can't
Right.
get the people to weigh
And
in.
they can't agree on, of course, the consultants say, are trying to figure out what their instructions are, basically, and they're conflicting because they answer to the boards, not the politicians, but everyone's connected. Of course, you know, the Sheriff Newell Norman is the head of one of the boards, the East Jeff board, so that's pretty political too.
No,
And one
quick-
thing that's pretty clear is that there's clearly some potential profit. Otherwise, these
Yes.
companies would not be jockeying
Right.
this vigorously with the ad campaign.
They're spending tons of money. And again, these are, proposals that run into the hundreds of millions of dollars.
So resolution anytime soon, do we think?
Who knows? Not before the IG report comes out, I think.
Okay.
Anyway.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. And still, we're talking about health care, Obamacare in Louisiana. How is it doing?
Well, so far we don't have any idea really. This is kind of like the rest of the country. Everybody knows about the terrible problems with the website nationally in order to sign up for new insurance. And it's no different in Louisiana, primarily because Louisiana was among the states that Governor Jindal rejected the idea of setting up the state-run website or marketplace, as did quite a few other states. And so the only one available in Louisiana is the federal website, and we all know what's happened to that in the last few weeks. We don't know how many people actually have managed to sign up. Interesting thing to me, I think, is if you look a little bit beyond the website itself, and let's assume that these problems are going to get fixed at some point because they have to, then what do we have when it actually is working? And interestingly, in Louisiana, we only have a few competitors vying for the business on this website. One of them, fortunately, is the biggest insurer, Blue Cross and Blue Shield. There are two other parties. One is Vantage Health Plan, which I believe is only operating primarily in northern Louisiana because they did have that option of just taking a piece of the state. They didn't have to offer coverage in the entire state. And I think they already have a base there. But if it weren't for the fact that a new nonprofit has started up and to offer health plans, there wouldn't be any competition at all in South Louisiana on this website. The new nonprofit is called Louisiana Health Cooperative. And Louisiana is one of about half of the states that managed to get one of these nonprofits started up before the sequester interfered. Part of the plan with Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, was that it made available loan money for the startup of these nonprofit health plans. And the sole purpose of doing this was to instill more competition wherever they're operating around the country. But only about half of the states managed to get a plan set up before the sequester kicked in and took away the loan money.
But we do have that set
So
up
we do
here.
have one. And that's the Louisiana Health Cooperative. Actually was set up by one of the people who started Ochsner Health Plan years back, which was quite successful and grew quite large before selling to another plan. So that's out there. We don't know how many people have managed to sign up, but those are the options that we have at the moment. Another interesting thing that we're seeing in some of the other states that have so far had some success with the signups, and these are the ones that set up their own mechanisms to do this. In the state of Washington, for instance, and Maryland, they've had, I think in Washington state, more than 40,000 people have signed up through their website, which was working fine until it had to link to the federal one and then it had to shut down. But most of the people who signed up were signing up for Medicaid, not for private health insurance. So that could be an early indicator that a lot of these folks are going to be going onto Medicaid through these plans.
So we continue to watch this all develop, not only in Louisiana, but across the country.
It's going to be a long time developing.
Another thing we're watching develop, Errol, is the continuing court saga regarding Brennans. What's the latest now?
Well, this week there were some lawsuits from creditors trying to get bankruptcy declared. There's a lot of money that's still owed. But to understand this, if you can, indeed you can understand it at all, there's two divisions. There's one group in which the main players are Ralph Brennan and a guy named Terry White. And they own the building that houses the restaurant that we know as Brennans. Then there's another group which by court ruling is headed by Owen Brennan. It was originally, looked like it was headed by Ted Brennan, who was Owen's brother. And he owns the restaurant. He and his family own the restaurant. So there's the restaurant, this entity called Brennan's, and then there's the building itself. And so technically, Brennan's, the restaurant, would be a tenant of that group. Now, what seems like it's going to happen is that, because Ralph Brennan has said, and Ralph Brennan is really in the driver's seat. This is Ralph. We know him from Ralph's in the Park and the Redfish Grill and several restaurants around town. A very accomplished restaurateur who's from the Commander's Palace side of the family. And he's indicated that he will be opening a restaurant in that building in the spring, sometimes around April. It will probably not, almost assuredly not, be called Brennan's, because unless there's an accommodation, they'd have a long way to go with the Owen Brennan side, and so it won't be called Brennan's. Now, the Owen Brennan side would love for some sort of reversal, for some kind of court reversal, but they've indicated that they may go somewhere else and open a restaurant called Brennan's. In fact, the restaurant that we knew at Brennan's at 520 Royal did not open there. Originally, in the 60s, it opened in another spot, and so that could happen too. And so this is the 15th anniversary of Dickie Brennan owning a restaurant called Dickie Brennan's. Mm-hmm. And back then there was a big lawsuit about whether or not he had the right to use the word Brennan in his title. And he was able to argue, well, look, Dickie Brennan's my name, so I can call it Dickie Brennan's. And so maybe that established a precedent to call it Ralph Brennan's. I don't know, but
so
there's more to go.
That saga continues. Mike, I'm going to go over to you real quick now. There was also a couple of reports regarding the reporting of crime statistics. If you can sort of give us a brief synopsis of what happened this week regarding that.
Well, yeah, 2 audits in 3 days. It almost seemed like they were ganging up on the NOPD, but it was coincidence that first the legislative auditor came out with a report that found some police incidents that were being called into dispatchers did not show up anywhere in crime stats, and it was less than 10% of the calls sampled. The police dismissed that as an allegation with no merit, and looked at the fact that false calls are made. You can go to a crime scene, and people have taken matters into their own hands. It's unfounded. People have left the scene. There's just nothing for police to follow up on. Some of those do fall through the cracks. More interestingly, on Wednesday, it was the New Orleans Inspector General came out with I would say a little more targeted audit in the 8th District of cases that were listed as 21L, lost or stolen property, in which those do not make the books as in any crime stat. And in this case, the IG's office, led by Howard Schwartz, former FBI agent, he did a follow-up, something the police did not do, to find that in 41% of these 21Ls over a 6-month period of time, that somebody's credit card was used unauthorized. Mm-hmm. So a crime did occur.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there was a disconnect, obviously.
And this is the tourist area of the city, right?
And this is the 8th District, French Quarter, CBD,
right.
And the conventional allegation goes over the many years is that police are more likely to dismiss these and not follow up because these are tourists from out of town, unlikely to follow up and say, hey, what happened to that theft I reported? But the most interesting part of all was that the police immediately said, you know what, you're right. We should not be classifying these. We should be following up. We're going to change the policy as of January 1st.
And also the IG is going to be following up, too, beyond the 8th District for these crime stats reporting.
Exactly.
Okay, Kathy, to you, kind of briefly, too. What's happening up the river regarding industry expansion, some of the chemical plants?
Billions and billions of dollars of investment. It's really kind of incredible if you just look at the numbers. If you only think about the numbers here, we're talking about close to $60 billion of investment going on upriver from New Orleans through Baton Rouge and some other areas around South Louisiana. This is all being done by the petrochemical industry, the refineries, the petroleum industry, and it sounds so huge. In fact, an interesting thing the other day, Mosaic announced that a previously announced plant, $1 billion investment, they're not going to make it anymore. And one of the state officials said something like, in another time, this would have been a really big deal, but given everything that's going on, it's just a drop in the bucket. So we have a lot of investment going on, but in terms of job impact, it's really it's not nearly the size of those numbers that it would seem. Mainly because most of the plant expansions that are going on with this money are automating the plants, further automating plants that are already highly automated. So for the long-term impact on employment, we're only going to see a handful of people here and there. You can invest $1.5 billion in a plant and hire 25 people for long-term jobs.
Maybe while the construction's being done, but in terms of
what we
long-term
are going to see
employment.
is a very big bump from construction. In fact, they're worried about that. Worried about gathering 80 to 90,000 construction workers over the next several years and getting them trained and getting them into Louisiana. So theoretically, in Baton Rouge area particularly, you could see this kind of expansion of housing and retail that after several years would probably contract again.
We'll be watching for that.
Indeed.
The governor's wife, Edwin Edwards,
Oh, my
is
goodness.
maybe not quite so feisty as he's been in the past.
Well, he's 86 years old now. He was 85 when this was filmed. He looks good for 85, I will say that.
Now, this is reality TV, we should say. That's
If depends on what your definition of reality is. It seems pretty...
Only semi-scripted.
Yes.
Seems like a contrived reality.
Very contrived. I mean, I thought, Edwin Edwards, big character. I was expecting maybe a political J.R. Ewing type. I compared it in my column to the Brady Bunch more because it's kind of this strange focus on the blended family. Edwin Edwards out of prison with his wife, who is 50 years younger, and they're trying to have a baby using in vitro fertilization. There's a lot of talk about the various methods of getting pregnant. At one point, Trina Edwards uses the word baby gravy, which is one of the new phrases that I think has entered the lexicon this week. And there's a lot of focus on Edwards' daughters from his first marriage, Victoria and Anna, who are both in their 60s. Trina Edwards has 2 teenage boys, and there's a lot of talk of, your stepsister and your stepbrother, and it just seems
Weird.
And there's talk of inheritance, too, and being concerned about the new baby coming in.
Yes, how many ways? Of course, Edwin Edwards also has has sons from his first marriage who are conspicuously absent, but the daughters are very present and I think loving it. From what I could say, they inherited their father's performance gene, maybe.
I think our friend John McGinnis had the best take on this. He called it must-miss TV.
Yes.
And of course, there was also talk of the governor maybe seeking another campaign.
There's the small matter of a presidential pardon. There are some obstacles to that, I would say.
What kind of inheritance did he have left?
Well, that was
Exactly.
one of the daughters complained, whatever the feds didn't take. So that
There you
was
go.
one of the very few references to prison, that and the fact that he had to decide what to wear in the morning as opposed to prison. Other than that, you wouldn't really know.
In this age of reality shows, Louisiana has inspired a lot of shows. The
Yes, it
Swamp
has.
Pump guys, the duck people, the lumber guy. For some reason, Louisiana and Alaska.
Yeah.
I mean, it just really inspire.
Right.
We have the type of characters.
It started with the tax credits, and I think then people got to see the characters, and it's snowballed.
It could be, so.
So how do you think really the public is going to consume this? I must say, I was at a dinner last night and a woman at the table said that she was really enjoying it. Now, she didn't know Edwin before. She's not been in this area terribly long. So she really couldn't compare him to what he was before.
I think a lot of it might come down to whether you find Trina Edwards interesting because she is the central character. She is the governor's wife, or as John McGinnis said, actually Supriya Jindal is the governor's wife. She's the governor's wife, but that doesn't have the same ring to it.
Right. Well, what are we going to be looking forward to in the months and weeks ahead?
Well,
Errol,
speaking
let's
of
go
reality
first to
TV,
you.
a little cultural observation. Sometimes Halloween is the people who have the non-scary, the topical costumes is an indication of what we're going to see from Mardi Gras. I want to show you 2 shots from this past Halloween. First of all, this is actually our director.
I recognize that lady.
That's
Yes,
our
it is a
director, Ashley
lady.
Richard, who's in a Duck Dynasty costume, but also at another party. This is a group that on Mardi Gras is known as the Ducks of Dixieland. And what were they dressed like for this Halloween? As Duck Dynasty.
Duck Dynasty,
all right?
yeah.
And so you saw a lot of Duck Dynasty this Halloween. And so my prediction that the high costume for Mardi Gras will be more Duck Dynasty. But who knows? Maybe about Mardi Gras, maybe it's going to be the governor's wife.
Governor's wife, or the former governor's wife.
I did see one governor's wife costume last night. So, so we're inspiring costumes.
If the Saints continue with their success, that Rob Ryan costume was pretty popular.
yes.
That could be a big one.
That could be a big one.
And his hair is definitely a good one to replicate. Huh? Mike, what do we see in the future from you?
Well, instead of looking ahead to weeks and months, how about today when the NOPD's tattoo policy is supposed to take effect? It was very controversial. The police associations did not manage to get that thing scrapped. So it'll be interesting to see now that it's in effect whether the police do crack down on visible tattoos, whether the officers comply with the turtlenecks or the long sleeves, and if any officer decides to take this to court and challenge it under perhaps a First Amendment challenge.
So what are you sort of hearing among the officers that you're talking to regarding this?
You know, just throw this into the mix of the many, many things that is hurting morale. I would say the change of the off-duty details is probably top on the list.
Residency is up again.
The residency, although that's now, they're looking to suspend residency. The other, big one is just the lack of police manpower.
So why pick this battle, about tattoos, I guess? Some are
A
questioning.
lot of people are asking that question. You haven't really get to get a clear answer.
Kathy?
Well, it's retail season. We're in November now, and that's the big season, and we have a lot going on in the New Orleans area. Retail is hot all over the place in South Louisiana right now, but we have 2 store openings coming up before Thanksgiving that are big ones. H&M, a European retailer which has very few outlets in the United States, is opening here. They were scheduled to open on Halloween, and they delayed it a bit, so I think it's coming mid-November. And Tiffany's, which is, for years has off and on been rumored, is for sure coming, and they're to open in Canal Place, they say, the day before Thanksgiving. So, bargains, Marcia, on earrings.
Bargains.
Black Friday.
Go right for it. Stephanie?
Well, it's also the political season, strangely enough, in New Orleans, because we have elections in February, city elections. And at this point, the campaigns for, say, city council are really starting to take shape. We've had a number of people make announcements. There are more coming this week, expected. Jared Brossett, who's kind of obvious successor to Cynthia Weir-Lewis, but fundraisers, we're about to start to see it.
The campaign season starting. I thank you very much for joining us this evening. Thank you for joining us. We'll look to see you next week on Informed Sources. Good evening.